While having an attorney in court is a right, that does not mean that the courts always appoint them. You get into a bit of a murky area about whether a youth is entitled to an attorney if their parents have money. Whose right is it? It's the child's right. But what if the parent doesn't want to spend money on an attorney, but the child really needs a strong defense? And I've been in court when parents wanted the child to admit to an offense because the parent did not want to take time off work to come back to court on a different date. And then, too, what if the parent is the person filing the complaint, which happens sometimes when there's a fight between the child and parent, and the child is charged with assault 4th degree? The answer to these questions are not always that clear-cut. At the first hearing, when the court decides whether or not they will be keeping the youth in a detention center or sending them home, there are specific selection criteria that are considered. As I said before, whether the child is a flight risk, safety of the community, and safety of the child. But there also appears to be some issue with class bias, and that socioeconomic status is a factor in the decision-making. The judge may be biased due to their own personal values, and race appears to be a factor, so that diversity or lack thereof by the members of the bench can creep into the decision-making. The judge can also be swayed if the child is from a two-parent versus a single-parent home, thinking that two parents might offer better supervision than one. And the criterion for choosing youth that are eligible for alternatives to detention might on its face look unbiased, but an application might favor some types of youth over others. For example, if the child is put on an ATD with an ankle monitor, whether the child has a landline phone or not may be a factor in whether that alternative is used. And the fees for the ankle monitoring have to be paid by the parent, which is interesting since it's so much less expensive to pay for an ankle monitor versus detention. It's less than $1 a day for an ankle monitor versus over $100 a day to house a youth in detention. Let's talk now about the selection criteria for waiver to adult court. It can vary from one state to another, but overall there are some common factors that most states use. These are all spelled out clearly in each state's juvenile code, and these are what are known as statutory factors. Generally, most states will consider at least two or more of the following, though: seriousness of the offense, whether the offense was against a person or property, with those against persons being more serious than property offenses, and the maturity of the offender, the likelihood of rehabilitation in the juvenile justice system, and that's often referred to as amenability to treatment, the previous history of the child, i.e., have they committed offenses before this one, and finally, whether they are a member of a gang or the offense was gang affiliated. In general, most juvenile justice systems have similar goals. Those are rehabilitation, retribution, restoration, and public safety. Rehabilitation is referring to making sure that the youth will no longer commit any more offenses. Retribution refers to whether there should be some kind of punishment associated with having committed the offense. Restoration refers to how to make the victim whole. And I want to note that there's a movement to restorative justice systems, and that's referring to that restoration has to occur not only for the victim, but also for the community and the offender as well. And the final goal, public safety, is the concept of crime control. So then these different goals must be balanced, and not just one goal should be achieved, but all four. And depending on what goals are being emphasized, that might then affect the sentence that's imposed and the views on treatment. You can see that different goals can be polarized with the others regarding the method of treatment. For example, if the focus was crime control, the attitude towards treatment might be that it's ineffective and coddles the offenders and does not effectively reduce crime. So considering treatment for delinquency, three of the most popular therapies are insight-based, behavioral therapy, and cognitive behavioral therapy. Each of these has a different emphasis. Insight-based therapy will focus on the counselor reflecting on what the youth is telling them and offering them insight, as well as prompting the youth to develop their own insight. Behavioral therapy is a little more traditional, with expectations that are developed for the youth and positive and negative reinforcements. These reinforcements might include extra privileges for the positive reinforcement, things like extra recreation or extra leisure time, or getting paid for work. And for negative reinforcement, that might mean consequences like time out, or some of those privileges being taken away. And finally, cognitive behavior therapies would consider what's known as thinking errors, meaning that the erroneous and counterproductive beliefs of the youth would be identified through discussions of past life events. Now, depending on the actual goal which the juvenile justice system wants to achieve, the system might want to consider what kind of therapy would be used. This slide helps you understand that different treatment modalities might be better than some for reaching certain goals. The outcome of psychotherapy or transactional analysis would be different than reality therapy. In other words, the outcome tends to be insight for the first two, and more of a social work outcome of realizing basic needs for the latter model. Some models take longer than others, too, so the length of time a youth is in treatment needs to be considered as well. Most residential treatment facilities will do some form of individual counseling, as well as group counseling. There are different models of these as well, but the current popular model is what's known as group-guided interaction, sometimes called GGI. The idea behind this is peer-oriented, meaning that the group interacts and the other residents in the group gives the individual feedback about their behaviors. It's also sometimes called positive peer culture. To work properly, there has to be assurance that certain dynamics are in place. It has to be a non-authoritarian atmosphere. Residents have to take responsibility for the group as well. If run poorly, it can be very counterproductive. But if done properly with the right kinds of youth, it can have very beneficial results. Sometimes the problems in a youth's life indicate that a specific type of intervention needs to take place, such as outpatient therapy or inpatient treatment. If drug use appears to be at the heart of the problem, then instead of going to juvenile court, the youth might instead go to a specific kind of court, like drug court. These courts are set up differently so that the judge and the juvenile justice worker can closely monitor a youth's progress in drug treatment. If the youth needs residential treatment or inpatient treatment, then if private insurance will pay, the youth may be able to check into a program. But if no insurance, then the state may have to place the child in a residential treatment program that are tailored to meet the specific needs of substance abuse.